Welcome to Business Growth Talks. This show is an essential viewing for entrepreneurship, leadership, and life lessons. Today, we are going to be talking to Rob Braiman, who will talk about innovation, dedication, and the transformative leadership. Rob is a seasoned serial entrepreneur with over 19 years in steering businesses towards growth and profitability. Rob is the mastermind between Cogent Analytics, where he shares his deep understanding of strategic planning, operations, and growth. Rob is obsessed with his clients' success, and this is rooted in his experience in the US Special Operations Command. Rob is a CEO of a team of 240 employees, from a cramped office to an Inc. 5000 list and a FTSE 1 for one of the fastest growing companies. Rob is going to be talking about navigating financial downturns and fostering a great company culture. We will uncover lessons from military service that have been pivotal in his entrepreneurial journey. If you are enjoying this content, please do consider subscribing and go to Business Growth Talks for more information. Hey Rob, how are you today?
Mark, fantastic. Thank you for having me on your show today.
It's an absolute pleasure. I'm really looking forward to this. I think this is going to be a really nice flowing conversation, and I'm really looking forward to it. So thank you for being here. As always, the first question is, what does a business mindset mean to you?
I probably take a little different perspective only because I've been representing entrepreneurs for near 20 years of my career. And most business owners, entrepreneurs go into business with a skill or a trade that they happen to be very good at. The first lesson that they classically learn is that skill and trade only get them so far, and that managing the business of the business, it becomes the most critical to their survivability. And if you allow me to expand on that thought a little bit, Mark, we have an approach when we represent our clients is really the four critical areas of business that would probably be important for each of your listeners. And that is business development. That's the process of making revenue happen in your business. It's usually bifurcated into key areas. One is the activity of selling and the activity of marketing your business, which we could do a whole nother show on marketing. The second pillar really is organizational engineering. That's having the right hats on the right heads, the right seats in the right chairs. I cannot tell you how many dysfunctional organizations I have seen over the years. The most functional is really how you do training, how you remunerate, how do you put skills testing and aptitudes in the right chairs to make sure it's fluid within your organization. The third pillar is operational engineering. That's effectively how you do what you do to the highest level of efficiency that you can. And then lastly is what we call the measurement pillar. And people get that a little conflated because measurement is not just the activity of measuring profit on a P&L or a balance sheet. It is also the activity of operationally measuring, organizationally measuring, and business development measuring, right? So that you are able to produce a good product at a good value with a good group of people, managed through the business development engine that makes it rain. Sorry for the longer answer, but that is the business mentality in my mind.
And I 100% agree with everything you've said. I think people, when they're looking at managing and building businesses, often get obsessed with the operational side because they've come from, whether they're a baker or whether they're a financial advisor, they get caught up in the technician part. I'm thinking of the E-Myth, which is one of my favorite books.
Great book.
And that sort of, you need the entrepreneur, the technician, and the operations person as well to be able to do all aspects. And you as the business owner should be the entrepreneur. You shouldn't be, unless, which I really liked in the book, unless you want to be a baker and you want one store. And that's absolutely fine as well. And I hear that a lot with not necessarily bakers, but with entrepreneurs that become an entrepreneur because of a lifestyle that they want. Not everyone wants to be an empire builder like Jeff Bezos or Elon Musk. And that's equally fine as well, because that's a life choice that you've made. But I think the audience that we're talking to now are really the people that are looking to grow and scale businesses. So those 4 pillars, I'd love you to share a link with me, and I'll put it in the show notes as well if you've got something like a PDF that I can share with people about those pillars, because I think that it's a absolutely critical message for entrepreneurs and business owners to think of. So, next question. Tell me one thing about your upbringing which reflects on who you are today.
I lost my father when I was 15 years old. And that probably played a very large role. And the second major youth experience is I had the privilege and sometimes the pain. My father was also a business person. And I tell people my history of where I've lived to include Brazil, South America for 5.5 years. And they asked me if I was a military brat. And I say, no, I was a corporate brat, which my dad had the premise of willing to move up, which is you can go back a couple of generations. And that was the old adage. But I would say those are 2 of the largest implications. I had the privilege of going to every South American country you can go to except for the Guyanas before I graduated high school. And then losing my father clearly, especially for a young man of 15 years old, changes the narrative of life. If you can imagine your pathway you think to be somewhat concrete, you watched your siblings go through their journey. And here I was at the age of 15 years old, having to completely reimagine what my next steps in life would be. It made me very self-sustaining, self-sufficient. I joined the U.S. military when I was 18 years old, almost 19 years old. And that self-sustenance, or having to stand on my own 2 feet, has probably carried itself nicely into my career choices and the commitment I've had towards service to others.
Yeah, I can't imagine what it's like to lose your father at 15. I lost in relatively quick succession my father, my mother, and my brother and my grandfather, all in a period of like 2 years, 2.5 years. And that for me was life defining, because it changed the way I outlooked on things. It led me to make decisions that ended me becoming a business owner and leaving the corporate world. And it's tricky. It's really tricky. And to lose a father figure at 15 must have been really life-changing. And did the military fill that void of a parental figure, do you think?
I always tell people I went from who's who to juvenile delinquent in about 2.5 seconds, and it took me about 2 years to graduate. I had a vice principal, and I played football. Sorry, not soccer. Football.
American football, yeah.
Yeah, cheers. And I went off to university. My mother, I think, shipped me out to get me away from the crowd I was running with post my father's demise. And I went to a semester of college, and I did really well in that first semester, mostly because I didn't know anybody else. And I think back on life and how those forks in the road occur. The military was a choice for me because I did not at that moment of life have the ability to afford the bill that was going to come next from going to university, right? I didn't have a scholarship. I was having to do it on my own. And I joined the Army because I believed it was a way to serve, and I believed it was a way to grow up a bit. My brother had served, and I saw it have a positive impact on his life. And I would say it profoundly had an impact on mine. So it gave me a lot of the foundational principles that any young man or young woman in today's world, I just think those foundations that you build early in life carry you for a long term as you continue to grow and mature.
Absolutely. So you transitioned from US Special Operations to founding Cogent Analytics. How do you think the military values have influenced your approach in business and in leadership?
So the one small correction, I actually built 3 different companies with a partner. First time I had junior equity, I think it was 3% equity opportunity when I was 26 or 27. My partner and I then built 2 other companies together. Okay. Which I was always in the subordinate position at the time. So the other guy with the gold got to tell me what to do every day. And I say that as humor, Mark. I don't want to come across as trite, but that transition, I was lucky enough to sell one of those companies. And then about a year and a half after that, he and I elected to sell my shares out to him. And I moved my wife closer to her mom and dad. And that really was the turning point to becoming a business analyst, which I did for about 10 years. And what an amazing PhD in Main Street business ownership, right? I had the privilege of working with probably somewhere between 1,200 and 1,500 clients personally while I was working for another firm. I didn't much align with their principles or values, which was that was what was the impetus of me starting Cogent Analytics. We're coming up on our 10-year anniversary. I always say that there was a whole bunch of lessons I learned of what not to do in that first journey of representing clients, because we have a phrase here at Cogent that says, raise others up and you will rise. And that's basically core to the principles that I have tried to build this firm off of. And that is in service to others. Now, that doesn't make you a servant. It means you are a service of. So your original question, and sorry for that really long answer, Mark, you asked the impact of my military background. And I'd say that my values, honor, courage, wisdom, faith, perseverance, and loyalty are the driving tenets to me. And that's really the base principles of how I try to lead this firm every day. And I think that plays a major impact in client trust, how we interact with our clients. The premise of our service to them is not based on a billed hour. It's about their success. And I think that's carried us nicely into the growth we've been able to achieve.
It's amazing. And I've got a question about the decisions and strategies, but that you made across your business. But I want to just touch in before that about business analysts. So you said it was a really good foundation for you to be able to run businesses. So I'm just trying to think back if we've ever had a business analyst on before, and I don't believe we have. Why don't you just tell me a little bit more in depth about how you assess a company, how you do is it on the 4 pillars again that you described earlier?
Those are the foundational birthings of how I came up with the 4 pillars.
Right.
We spend between 3 and 5 days fully immersive with a company. It starts with an opening dialogue with the equity shareholders and really understanding what their why is and what their want is for their organization. I see a lot of people make the mistake of just focusing on the mechanics of business, and they lose sight of the client, that entrepreneur, that people's behavior is as much dictated by their own value system, what their personal wants are for themselves and their family and their children, their employees and their families and their children. The base premise of entrepreneurial analytics, as opposed to what I call big box, you see these big box consultancies that we can do amazing analytic breakdowns of profit trends and product trends. And we do that on purpose. But if it's not attached to the client themselves, that the message gets completely lost. It's like the old story, if a tree falls in the forest and nobody's around, does it make a sound? And I've seen that horror story over and over again. I call it the binder guy that just goes in and gives people good advice, but don't care. They really don't care whether the client picks it up and deploys it in their operations. And that's just something I've never really had a stomach for.
It sounds like you look at the more holistic side of the business as well, the people behind it, not just employees, but the owners and what their aspirations, what they want to achieve, a big part of your success.
If you had a best friend and you and he owned an exactly like type business, both of you would have some commonality in your approach to that business, but you would also have 20 or 30% that was mutually unique to each other. There is no template that you can lay over the top of an entrepreneur and have a perfect solution. Don't get me wrong, the base principles of business, I did not write that book, but the base principles that you first uncover how they're approaching it, and you try to marry solutions with the individual and their team, which really is the efficacy of those solutions. It's the human driver.
So something I believe very strongly is that marketing and sales is the critical point. You can have a pretty poor product, but if you're marketing and selling it very well, you can have a successful business. And again, we could do a whole show just on sales and marketing.
Just on that. Yeah.
Yeah. But what's your view when you're analyzing companies and you're thinking about how to project or how to move them forward? Do you always loop back? So you mentioned in the 4 pillars it was always based around business development, and so that is encapsulated within sales and marketing. How do you navigate that idea that sales and marketing is the critical component of business?
So interesting enough, the way the pillars are designed is there's connective tissue. You cannot have one singular problem in any given business that's not going to play an impact in any or all of the other pillars. And I'll give you, for an example, if you generate great revenue, but you have a weak organization, you are likely going to minimize the effect of your success. If you have a great organization, but don't have any operations or really efficiencies defined in your company, your organization gets frustrated, and it's absolutely going to diminish your go-to-market strategy. If you think of the measurement pillar, and I'm going to be careful about this one, Mark, measurement is not a function of lording over your employees. Measurement is a function of empowerment. Most people will strive to do a good thing if they are empowered with enough information to say what's expected, how it's measured, and then you tie their remuneration to that success story. That's where you get organizational buy-in. Sorry for a little longer answer, but people get trapped a little bit in it's 1, 2, 3, 4, where in that holistic approach, it's really not. How you prioritize revenue against what your operations can efficiently produce and what your organization can efficiently produce will either contribute to profitability and cash flow, liquidity, or it will detract from it. I've seen many companies fail because they grew too fast without having the right organizational structure, operational efficiencies in place.
Absolutely. I just had an interview with someone a couple of days ago, and he was really hammering home that point that too faster growth can be as much of a hindrance as not enough growth. Because if you I always think back to the Richard Branson sort of idea. I'll say yes to the client and then I'll work out how to do it afterwards. And I get why he says that, because he trusts in his team that they can deliver, and he's been able to do that. But there is definitely an argument that too fast a growth, if you haven't got the infrastructure around you with the right employees, and you mentioned right at the start, and it's another thing for me, is getting the right people in the right seats is so important for that growth and being able to grow and scale. Just touch on that point of getting the right people in the right seats.
And I'm gonna add one thought before we move on to right hats, right heads, or right hind ends in the right chairs.
Yeah.
Every entrepreneur I've ever met tends to build the airplane while they're flying it. And I think that's a nature of entrepreneurs, right? When people decide they're going to become an entrepreneur, and they've got a great idea that they want to bring to market, most of there's a maturation point somewhere between $1.5 million of gross revenues where you can almost muscle it there. And then the business of the business takes over. So now we get to organization. I had the privilege of listening to a podcast last week, and the interviewee said something almost identical that I have said for years. And I was like, oh my gosh, there's no such thing as a unique thought. But I have said to clients for 20 years, don't allow hiring to be about your own ego. So many people will go through a very diligent hiring practice. So they use the boards to be able to bring candidates to them. They go through the application review, they interview candidates 2-3 times, and they make a hiring decision. The worst behavior isn't either the lack of hiring or the hiring practice itself. It's what happens next. So many entrepreneurs, I hire Mark to come to work for Cogent Analytics. And I know, gosh, that just wasn't the candidate that I thought would be successful for my organization. And I know it fairly quickly. I knew it within 60, 90 days as to whether or not you're going to be a good cultural fit for my organization, or will you have the aptitudes and proficiencies that you represented to me. And then I see entrepreneurs hold on to bad candidates for 6 months, 9 months, a year, sometimes 2 and 3 years before they transition a bad mistake, because it becomes about their ego, right? It's hard to admit to yourself that you made a bad choice. And the first thing I tell entrepreneurs is it's not personal. You're making the strategic decision to add somebody to your organization. That person is critically important, regardless of your size, right? How they are a cultural fit, which I made mention of before, but more importantly, are they systemically, operationally process people that are going to make an add to your organization, or are they the anchor that's weighing your boat? And that's, sorry for the more global premise, but it's probably the singular greatest failure is bad hiring practice. So they hire out of crisis, and then they hold on to people because it becomes about their own ego. Sorry for the longer answer.
No, and I get that, because I've made, I always come back to this, that I made a decision on hiring on ability rather than attitude. It bit me in the ass so badly, and I think that's something you have to be aware of. But fortunately,
we all do it.
I know, but it's dropping your ego to go, okay, I made a mistake, let's move on, let's get the person out, and then we can then hire someone else, or work a way forward with it. Dropping your ego is a massive thing for entrepreneurs, because often they're the blockers on success, because they think they can do it better than anyone else. I've always tried to employ people and bring people along my journey, because I don't want to do all the operational stuff. I don't want to be servicing the clients all the time. And B, I think it's a worthwhile exercise as you grow to be able to hire right from the start, so that you're learning those mistakes when it's possibly not as critical as further down the line. But employees are so important to business growth.
And developing leadership, you hit a point of scale where, to begin with, you hire employees, and over time you develop employees into managers. Managers manage tasks, right? Leaders inspire managers to be the best version of themselves. And it is one of the serious gaps you have in companies that are scaling, is they may have good management, but really struggle on the leadership training and development with their ascending personnel. Because if not, the entrepreneur is always tied to their chair. They never have that opportunity to be the dreamer, the visionary, the driver, that social, emotional, psychological mission, vision, values that drive every company is typically driven through the entrepreneur. And if the entrepreneur gets stuck in the thick of thin things by becoming a manager instead of a leader, that is one of the singular greatest failure points for companies that are trying to scale.
Yeah, I would agree. And from a leadership point of view, someone described this to me, and it made me think about how I lead in my companies and they described it as you push people to success, or you pull people to success. Have you come across that definition, and what's your thoughts on a push or a pull leader?
So I'll equate it to my military experience, right?
Sure.
And I always distill it down for clients so they can understand with a visual. I said, in my military experience, there was always the guy that ran to the top of the hill and was screaming at the top of the hill to tell everybody to hurry up.
Yeah.
Right? And then there was those rare few leaders that ran back down to the bottom of the hill and said, hey, dude, I'll run with you.
Yeah.
So I've always been one of those people that I believe in the goodness. I think most people, they want to take care of their families. They want to pay their bills. They want to be able to have their own personal success story. And the journey is teaching people how to be the better version of themselves.
Mm.
So running back down the hill and running with the last man doesn't tell not just the last man that you have their back and you're wanting to see them be successful, but everybody else that you ran past going down see that behavior in you, and it inspires them to help others. And that's that inspirational behavior of getting people to be the best version of themselves. And that's, now I realize I'm exuding a personal belief, but I think it has served me very well over the course of my career.
I would 100% agree with you. So let's go back to the start. You started in a small office and you have built this to over 2,800 clients across 30 states. It's an incredible journey that you've done. Is there any sort of pivotal decisions or strategies that you can talk to now which has propelled you to growth?
So for us, and hopefully this is good listening for your audience, right? I have always been very focused on building a strategy, which is, I think having a plan is paramount to a successful business. You have to have a financial plan. You've got to know how much liquidity or cash flow you have to work with. You've got to know what people or process in your business. And that ultimately is how I scaled Cogent, right? I started with 6 people in I used to have to leave my office to change my mind to tell you how small my office was. And my wife and I talk frequently about this amazing journey that we've been on. I think the number you reported at the beginning of the show was 240. This year, right now, we're sitting near 270. That's how we are growing in 2024. And I just have a hard time taking credit. I have been blessed with finding amazing people that have adopted the core values of Cogent Analytics and have made this place better. So it's no longer about, I'm not some idiot savant that I think I have the master plan. I am very diligent about the principles of business, and I'm a die-hard believer that as long as you have a clear mission and a clear vision that other people can understand, you are going to find a percentage of the population that adopt your mission and vision. They make it their own, and then they are a great source of wisdom and knowledge, because now you're expanding your team instead of it just being individual, which I think is critical to scaling any company. I've had the privilege of seeing $2 million clients and $200 million clients, and it's a common thread that you see in those scalable companies.
So something I was thinking about, and you've touched on it there, is about the complexities and reducing complexities within businesses.
For sure.
Can you share some of the steps that business owners can do to think about how to simplify their business for growth?
I'm going to answer that question. I love the complexity of these questions. This is a robust interview, Mark. Normal entrepreneurial behavior, and I said to you earlier, people can muscle it up on their own accord to a given size. It isn't until they can look at the different facets, and you can break it down into profit centers. You can break it down into operational centers within the business, which feed the profit centers. But you have to segment your revenue streams or segment your operational streams so that you can then distill the problems or inefficiencies that are happening. I call it a gap analysis.
Yeah.
Right. And if you're honest with yourself as an entrepreneur, every business has a gap or a series of gaps that either detract or contribute to the pain you go through as an entrepreneur. Part of our discovery process that we do with our clients is all about 3 to 5 days of gap analysis so that we can empower a business owner to see it through what I say is above the forest instead of walking around in the forest and bumping off of every tree. Sorry for the bad humor. The segmentation of those either people, profit centers, or operational centers within the business, and then distilling it down to root cause analysis. And because a lot of people get stuck in the thick of thin things, right? They get so trapped into the failing instead of the reason why it failed. And they end up putting out fires all day long instead of actually dealing with the root cause. And it's just such a critical behavior to distill down. Rarely it's a 5 why exercise. Sorry, Mark, I didn't mean to ADHD on you, but the way I look at almost everything is that the problem you're experiencing is a symptom, not the problem itself, and really distilling down those symptoms to find your root cause and then dealing with those roots sends a broader message to your people, and it is a healthier, much quicker path to running or having a better business.
So let's just dive into the root cause analysis that you do for your clients. So you're looking at the causes, the analysis of why a company might not be growing as much as perhaps the founder wants it to grow. Is that often the cases? Are you often looking at companies are not growing and you're trying to work out how they can achieve that growth through operational, business development, sales, marketing, etc.?
Growth is a huge marker. I always tell the joke, the $2 billion client always wants to be 5 million. And when you ask them the question, what do you imagine your growth to be? They'll always say 5 million. The $5 million guy always says 10 million. The $10 million guy always says 20. It's very funny how it works out that way. Profit and liquidity are probably the singular largest driving force in our discovery process, because big isn't always better. And you said it earlier, if you just want to be the singular baker, that's okay. You don't have a whole lot of staff to pass hats away to, but if that's your life choice, you can do that. Most of our clients that we're working with, scaling a company appropriately is definitely a driver in the conversation, but it makes zero sense to take a $3 million company to 5 million. If at 3 million you're making 10% or 300,000, if you then grow up to a $5 million company to make the same 300,000, that's probably not a good plan. So we start with profitability and liquidity, the health and welfare of your balance sheet, because that is your wealth creation vehicle. Why be an entrepreneur? It's not, and I've said this 1,000 times, profit is not about greed. It is the oxygen in the room. If you can make a product and go to market that is a predetermined minimum mandatory profit, that's saying I know what I want to make before I get there, and I manage my business appropriately to generate a minimum mandatory profit. Now you have enough liquidity to afford things like growth or capital equipment or capital expense that you have to purchase or replace. This is the business of the business. So I love the growth conversation. Just to be clear, I have a lot of clients, I'd say 60, 70% of our clients that are interested in growing or scaling their business. We are always looking at profitability and liquidity as a driving force, because again, growth is the number one killer of business. You have to build it wisely. I don't want to say smart because that's deprecating to every entrepreneur out there, but there's a certain amount of wisdom from building a healthy company with good revenue. And I said to a client last week, the lack of profit in your business is not the problem. The lack of profit in your business is the symptom of the way you're running your business. And that is universally a true story. So hopefully that resonates with your audience.
It doesn't, and profitability, like I get frustrated when people just, oh, my revenue's this. And it's okay, but what's the profitability at the end of it? Because it actually doesn't matter if you've got a huge revenue, if you're not making any profit, the business. And the other thing that you've just mentioned there is about liquidity as well. Having cash in the business for the recessions, and we're going to talk about recessions and financial downturns hopefully soon, but having those things in place, a profitable business and liquidity in your business for if something goes wrong. And it frustrates me when I hear the Grant Cardones, who is like, this whole idea is cash is trash, and I get why they're saying that.
Argument.
I get why they're saying it, because like money
I do
sitting in the
too.
bank actually is not working for you. But I would bet a Grant Cardone or any of the other people, the influencers who are making these comments, they will have a cash reserve sitting somewhere that they can access if something does go wrong. So they're actually giving a mixed message for entrepreneurs. What's your thoughts on Grant Cardone? There's a number of them that use this metaphor.
So I don't want you to suck me in having an opinion about another pontificator of the world, but you can take by my response what you will. What what I will say, and I hope this resonates with everybody. As a small business owner, you take on all of the risk, and when you make a profit, you have 4 obligations that must be paid before you ever see a distributed dollar, right? We all take a wage.
Yeah.
But the real wealth creation in the process of entrepreneurship is after you've paid your taxes, after you've paid your obligation to the bank, after you've paid for growth, because growth costs money, right? Your receivables grow, your payables grow, your inventory grows, all those things grow while you're growing. Then you have to pay for capital expenditures. Those are the expenses that you are paying that don't end up on your debt line. And after all of that has been paid, then an entrepreneur gets to keep a little bit of money or a lot of money, depending on how they decide to manage their business. Again, not about greed. It's what you do with the money that you've made after you've made it that really plays an implication into the wealth creation vehicle called your business. So 4 things again, and I want to make a point to your audience, Mark. You got to pay your taxes. You got to pay the bank. Those are your first 2 most important partners, or they're likely going to put you out of business. Then you got to pay for growth. And I know much of your audience likes to have the growth conversation. Growth costs money, and you have to pre-plan for how much liquidity you need to be able to grow. And then any like type capital expenses before you get to take what we call a distribution. That's the passive income that you've already paid taxes on. Or a dividend, depending on your corporate structure. But that's really where wealth is created for an entrepreneur.
Yeah. How often is the conversation about an exit plan part of your discussions?
You're talking to a gentleman that believes the day you plan for exit is the day you open the doors. So I would say 100% of the time.
Okay.
Different for age groups, right? And the 30-year-olds are always 10 foot tall and bulletproof. They haven't fallen off enough mountains to become wise yet. But most especially with my 50-pluser crowd, you get to that journey in life and you begin to imagine what life is going to be if you're able to liquidate your asset, or what your quality of life is. Am I going to make more investments at 60 years old, or am I going to start contemplating retirement? And then it gets into the who discussion. Right? Am I doing an internal succession? Am I preparing my business to sell to a third party? Is there a family member that's going to take over my business? So again, 100% of the time, succession should be part of the narrative, or it's just a foundational mistake. I suppose if you want to die on your desk, right, do the DOD retirement package. Die on desk. I suppose that is a strategy. I'm not much a party to that one, but it is a strategy.
So I said we were going to talk about recessions and financial downturns. So what's your experience of the challenges that companies have when they're looking in downturns to be able to survive and thrive? Because that's the important thing in recessions is, look, sometimes it's batten down the hatches. In COVID, hospitality and things like that were crippled, and it was literally, we just need to get through this to hopefully thrive afterwards. But for a different type of business, what are the strategies that they should deploy to be able to get through those downturns?
The greatest thing about entrepreneurs is adversity breeds innovation. We did a recession readiness exercise when COVID first hit, and that was really the assessment with our entire client base of the impact of revenue, right? How was that going to play into your staffing levels and your cash burn rate? operationally, could you still operate in and the pandemic was different than almost every other downturn I've been through. And I've been through 3 complete downturns, to include the Great Recession here in the United States in '09, which really lasted '08, '09, '10, and number of years of recovery. Best activities I could advise is really managing profitability and having, as you referred to, a war chest, right? I've always advocated a minimum of 2 payroll cycles in cash reserves. I've been more conservative than that most of my career with my cash reserves because I guess I've lived through enough downturns to understand the implication of it. Having to reimagine your businesses in those moments of downturn really is it's the marker of survive or die. I've seen so many entrepreneurs wait to make decisions based on hopium. A recession is a financial condition. It's not determining whether or not you're going to be successful or not. And I've met as many entrepreneurs that have embraced the downturn and reimagined their business at those critical moments and have come out of it wildly more healthy or healthier, because it's, I hate to say it this way, but a recession is a culling of the herd. Those irresponsible folks that do not manage their financial liquidity appropriately usually are the victims of a recession. And those folks that survive the recession classically take on all of that opportunity that is provided to them. And I always equate it, Mark, if there were 100 entrepreneurs that had 100 doors that they could do business with, in a really big uptime, a lot of times you'll have 120 feeding that 100. And in a recession, you have 75. If you have 75 survivors, but you still have 100 doors of opportunity, you have a smaller herd eating off that same pie. And that's really been the determining factor for many of our clients, especially coming out of COVID, is getting them to make the adjustments in their business quick enough that their reaction time to that financial condition that the market was imposing upon them made the difference of survive or die.
Do you think we're in a recession now?
So we are not. Like every economic, I hear it on the media, depending, and that's the dysfunction of the world today, right? Depending on what bubble you listen to determines what you believe is happening to you. I'm a financial geek, right? I'm an analyst. So if I were to base my decision-making process on employment numbers, if I was to base it on GDP, if I was to base it on durable goods sales, if I was to base it on transition of goods across the pond, regardless of whether you can think about durable goods being made and shipped into the U.S. from Mexico, from south of the border, even farther, from the Far East, all of those numbers are up. So there's no leading indicator that would make me believe that we are in a recession. Employment numbers and GDP being the singular driving force behind that comment.
It's an interesting one because in the UK, technically, we have gone into recession, but the recession's based on minus 0.7% or something like that. So it's not a huge dip, but technically we're in a recession. But I see things like we're calling it the cost of living crisis over here.
Underemployment, inflationary impacts.
Yes.
Right.
Which are having a massive impact on businesses and people and careers and jobs. And I must admit, I thought the 2023 was not a great economic state. I'll talk about the UK specifically, and I think the echoes to the US as well. But in 2023, we were not in a great shape. In that inflation was increasing, like it went up to 10%. But when you factor in other aspects, it's probably with energy prices, it's probably 11 or 12%. And people were generally really struggling. But we weren't technically in recession because we had a bounce back with the sporting event and something, all these sorts of factors which I'm leaning into your geekiness because I get a little bit geeky about some of these things as well. And I would have said 2023 was probably a harder set of conditions for business owners
A
than
reset
2020.
year.
A reset. Oh, that's interesting. That's how you describe it, is it? When it's not
We,
necessarily a recession, but the companies are being forced to reset where they're going.
Yeah, you had explosive inflation across the globe for any one of a number of things, right? You had a supply chain break, you had
Yeah.
durable goods break, you had countries like the UK and the US that had outsourced many of their durable goods. So even if you were John Contractor and you were
Mm,
trying to put in, let's say, an HVAC system, you've got to wait on that finished good product, which
mm,
maybe only a portion of it was manufactured within the UK itself, and you had to wait on parts and
yeah.
pieces.
Yeah.
All of a sudden, having to wait on those parts and pieces, the demand didn't go down, the supply went down, which then drove the price up.
Yeah.
So that's one contributing factor. You have a unique circumstance in the UK, which is the rippling effect of Brexit and the
Yeah.
trade relationships
Which
across
are
the EU.
slow. Yeah, but it's a
Oh
slow
my
process. The
gosh.
UK are not doing this as efficiently or as quickly as they should be.
No, very difficult for you because of the trade restrictions and not
Yeah.
being able to get to. You were able to survive a number of trade relationship impingements living off of some of the old agreements,
Mm,
but
mm,
even that's going to come to bear at some point in time.
yeah.
I called it a reset year because you reach a stasis or a balance, right? For 20 years, we had no measurable inflation. It was a nominal 1 percentage point.
Yeah.
And what you effectively did because of the break in the supply chain and labor substantially,
Yeah.
right? Cost of labor went up, cost of materials went up
Yeah.
simultaneously, which then demand rose as monies were pumped into the economy in the UK and the US with employee retention credits.
Yeah.
We had what was called the EIDL loans, we had the
Yeah.
PPP funding, you had a like type program.
Yeah.
That much liquidity being injected into the economy then made people go spend money. Well, they
Mm,
were trying to spend money on durable goods and services that were not available, and there was no labor to accelerate this speed and nominalize the impact of the supply chain break. And I know I just lost your entire audience, but
with you, just about.
I
I'm
am
still with you.
definitely a geek, right? To me, there had to reach a basis where most of the liquidity that was injected into the resurging, whether it's here or there, helped the economies sustain themselves. Demand
Mm,
reached a nominalized level. Supply chains continued to improve. Now, our inflation has right sized much faster than yours have. And I was about to say y'all because I'm in North Carolina. So our inflationary impact has nominalized or normalized during this period of time, which I think we're right at about 3%, which is
yeah.
still a little high where we like to be.
Yeah.
I think that marginal number at 2% would be a healthy
Yeah.
basis. We
Yeah.
saw a lot of wages increase, but you had inflation go up faster than wages increased, which
Yeah.
is why it didn't feel right.
Yeah.
Now we here in the US are starting to see wages have increased beyond the inflationary impact. So it
Okay.
isn't until the last 2 quarters
Yeah.
that you start having people say things like, "Oh, I guess it is getting a little better."
Yeah.
But
We're not there in the
you're
UK.
not there yet. I
No.
think you're a
No.
year behind us.
Yeah, the whole what we're calling the cost of living crisis, which is that inflation's going up and rents are going up
Amen.
and all the money that's been pumped into the economy over the last 6 years or whatever it is obviously having an inflationary impact. And equally, we've got Ukraine, which has impacted. There's a lot of money going
Huge.
over to there, and there's been a supply chain issue because Ukraine is not producing grain. Look, I can geek out on this as well, Rob, but it's a factor that I think and what's been great about this conversation is we've very much gone micro into the business, understanding the
Mhm.
business, and towards the end we've gone macro, which I think is interesting for people to get that sort of idea that look. I subscribe to a David Goggins sort of methodology that everything's my fault, right? So if something's not going well, if it's in my family, I'll think about how I can make it to be able to change it. And when you're a business owner, sometimes you should have that mentality of, if it's not working, is there something that I can do to change it? Is it leadership? Is it operations? Is it sales? Is it marketing? What can we do to
All
change,
the
to
above.
evolve and get better? But sometimes these macro issues, they don't always affect small businesses, but there are knock-on effects. There's ripple effects which
For
actually
sure it
impact these
does.
businesses. And so I think people are struggling at the moment. I think we probably are a year behind where you sound like you are. And looking at the stock market as well, the S&P has been increasing, where the FTSE
Mhm.
has been a little bit up and down. So there are definitely, our inflation's at 4%, I think at the moment, 4.25, something like that. But it's an evolving case, and as an entrepreneur, you have to be aware of it. It doesn't dictate what you do, but having an awareness of potential opportunities as well, because then if you were getting something from the Ukraine and now you can't get that, there are alternatives, and they might be cheaper alternatives. For example, we should always be aware of the macro, but don't get obsessed by it. A lot of people that are who are like political or news junkies get
They get
obsessed
spun
by it.
up.
They get spun
Yeah.
up on it. I could talk to you, Rob, forever. This has
Oh,
been a
we could do this for
fantastic
hours.
conversation, but I want to be respectful of your time. So I asked the same 6 questions to all of my guests. They're quick fire questions. They don't need a quick fire answer. First one I wanted to ask you was, what's the best decision that you made?
Marry my wife. No
What?
question, hands down, marrying my wife was the best decision. I've been married to her for 30 years. She is my heart. She is my soul. She's my best friend. That was an easy one. So
Okay.
you
I'll
fire
I'll
away, Mark. If
I'll
you want
go
to
over.
narrow that down, that was a broad
No, that's
question. So
good.
I gave you the.
No, that's all good. Maybe this will be a little bit harder. What's the best piece of advice you've been given?
When you're up to your ass in alligators, it's hard to remind yourself that your initial objective was to drain the swamp. Now, that hangs on my office wall.
Okay.
Um, and I will tell you, I use it because every once in a while, especially as you're scaling, it seems like the bigger you get, the more sources of challenges that arrive at your desk, even when you have a great organization like I do. I always chuckle to myself when I am faced with 5 or 6 challenges instead of 1 or 2,
Mm,
that I put myself here. And you said something earlier in the conversation that macroeconomics, I don't think anything happens to you in life. I think you have control over it. I think you have
mm,
power over it. And that's really what that piece of advice says to me, is nothing is happening to, yeah, there are conditions that in the moment you may not feel like you have the answers. With a good team and a little bit of diligence and being open minded, you can happen to it
yeah.
instead of it happening to you. So that's why I cherish that quote. It used to hang on my father's office wall,
Where
and
did
my
it come
mother
from?
gave it
What,
to
where's
me.
it? Where does it come from? What's the
Oh,
origin?
he was a double engineer. So my dad was way more of a geek than I am.
Okay.
Um, and I don't know the root source of it, but I remember looking at that when I was 7 years old and chuckling because it had the word ass in it. And, as I've gotten older and wiser and I've got all my gray hairs, maybe it's taken on a deeper, more profound meaning.
Amazing. Who's the person that has helped you most in your career?
I've got quite a few. I have had really good partners. I would say the directorship team that I have built over the last 10 years here at Cogent, it is far more durable today, 10 years into this journey, than it was in the first couple of years.
Okay.
But I would also say that I've had partners that had a profound impact on my development. I've had advisors, friends, and mentors that I cherish that have always keep me grounded. My current corporate counsel is a friend of 35 years that he's always the person that tells me the truth, even when I don't like it.
Nice. You always need them.
Right. And I say everybody needs 2 or 3 of those people. My successor in Cogent Analytics, he's not my son, probably in spirit and in heart. He is. I've been working with him for 9 of the last 10 years, developing him to sit in this chair. He's also one of those people that can unabashedly tell me the truth, even when I don't like it. I always challenge myself to have people way smarter than me, and I surround myself with those people, and I try to create an environment for them to be able to punch old Big Pop in the nose from time to time.
We all need to be punched every so often, don't we?
Right?
Tell me about a regret that you have.
Good golly, life is full of lessons. I made a transition early in my career. I told you about choosing to become an analyst. There have been plenty of times when I allowed my passion to take away from my family. And if I were to do it all over again, I probably would have inverted that story. I've profoundly changed my kid's life and probably their kid's life for generations to come. And in quiet moments, I always ask myself, was the journey worth it? So to me, that's a regret if you're asking yourself that question. And I think
you didn't spend enough time with your family? Is that what you're going towards?
I was a football coach. I was a basketball coach. I went to all the cheer competitions. I went to dance recitals. For my son and my daughter were both highly active, but we have a wonderful family unit, and probably family is the thing that drives me the most. So an easy answer would be yes, absolutely. Because I think about those times when I was working with a client and I was away from home, which is my passion, also meant I wasn't at home. Those are some of the sacrifices you make as an entrepreneur.
Absolutely.
And there's not a single listener that's an entrepreneur that if they look themselves in the rearview mirror, if they're driving in their car and they look at themselves and tell themselves the truth, they've probably had to make some sacrifices to change the trajectory for their family.
Yeah. What are you most proud of?
Tell you, I love this question. I would tell you the thing I probably take the singular greatest pride in, and my wife and I talk about this all the time. We had 12 babies in Cogent Analytics last year. We had a couple of dozen people buy houses. So when I talk about the thing I'm proudest of, it's really the impact that this journey has had on all these lives. If you think about our influence, we have 270 people. It's not just the 270 that work here. It's their spouses and their children. And then you talk about clients. And if I have a client with 50 employees, it's that client and their family and their employees and their families. So those are the stories that I think keep me going every day when I think about scaling Cogent to coast. Is that broad impact that we've been able to have, that footprint in life that I probably cherish the most.
That's amazing. Why do you do what you do?
You mean besides the fact that I'm crazy?
That might be the answer. Shall we just move on? No. But what is it that you've mentioned family, you've mentioned your company's family, you've mentioned your client's family, but I did a post today which was about why you should turn up every day and the importance of turning up every day.
Amen.
Now, obviously, in this current world, I had to put in a caveat that if you need rest and recovery, you should do that, because absolutely people's mental health are important. And
nothing wrong with holiday.
Absolutely. Stepping away and taking a break is definitely important. But why do you turn up? Why do you turn up every day?
Okay, so aside from my hey, I'm crazy answer, I have put my feet on the floor for 35 years, and the first thing I say to myself every single day of my life is, what will I do today to change a life? What will I do today to make a difference? What will I do to improve the lot for myself and others? I'm getting closer to the end of my journey than I am the beginning now. I have a whole lot more gray hairs than I used to have. And at the end of the day, I want to be able to leave a legacy that has a lasting effect on entrepreneurs. I've been a serial entrepreneur my whole career. I have represented entrepreneurs for the last 20. That that journey that I have the privilege truly afforded to me every single day by another entrepreneur, a family member, somebody on that same journey that I've been on for 30 years of my life. Yeah, it's a pretty easy answer. I watch the videos and read the testimonials, and I read about the impact that we've had on these families. And if you can't get out of bed for that, I'd say keep your ass in bed.
Yeah. And you preempted my last question, which is, but I want to ask it anyway. What does legacy mean to you?
Having a durable, lasting organization that long survives me, right? That footprint that I've been working on for the last 10 years. April 22nd is our 10-year anniversary, and I'm proud of this team. I'm proud of what we've been able to accomplish. And I know the journey is 10 years seems like a long time, and yet it's a snap of the fingers. I have a reasonable expectation that Cogent Analytics will be coast to coast. And eventually, I know we already have clients that have attempted to pull us over to the EU, have attempted to pull us south of the border to Mexico and parts south of that. To me, this foundation may very well be an opportunity of a footprint that long survives me. And as long as we do it honorably and we do it respectfully and we do it with integrity, I know I will have accomplished my task.
Amazing. And lastly, where can people find you if they want to reach out to you or learn more about your business?
CogentAnalytics.com. We have advisors literally fielding questions for entrepreneurs every day. Right? We don't expect you'll all always do business with us, but if we can point you to a resource, if we can point you to an article, if we can answer a question, we are in service to others. So Cogent Analytics, for your audience here in the States, it's 833 for my profit. And if you want numbers to that, it's 833-464-7763. But just remember for my profit, the number for my profit.
Amazing. Look, thanks, Rob. Thanks so much for your time today. It's been absolutely fascinating. And I love the fact that we've been able to geek out on stuff. And the secret is we probably lost a few people listening because we geeked out, but absolutely loved it. I thank you so much for your time. It's been brilliant speaking to you.
Oh, mate, this has been one of the best interviews I've had in a very long time. I've absolutely enjoyed it. It's been my privilege being on your show.
Thank you so much.